Well, the Prime Minister won't comment on whether the attacks were illegal under international law, saying it's up to the US and Israel to explain their position. But he described any action to stop the regime developing nuclear weapons as a good thing. And as senior political correspondent Jenna Lynch reports, the death of Iran's supreme leader has been welcomed by Iranians living here.
It's hard to understand joy in war, but Iranian Kiwis celebrated in the streets when they heard the news the supreme leader had been killed.
It was the best day of my life.
Samira Tagavi lived in Iran most of her adult life. She says she was imprisoned and tortured at the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and she wants New Zealanders to understand why Iranians are celebrating.
It's not because Iranian people like war or want war. It's absolutely the opposite, because this is the only way for Iranians to be able to actually feel liberated, to have some sort of hope, because everything has failed in the past 47 years.
As the tension in the region rises, she fears for her family, but not because of the US strikes.
I'm not worried actually about the strikes killing my family. I'm quite worried about IRGC killing my family, because the risk on the part of IRGC attacking its own people during the time of war, just to be able to blame it on someone else, that's higher than these targeted strikes actually killing civilians.
New Zealand has condemned the regime's violent reaction to protesters.
This is an evil regime that has killing its own people. By even just in the last few months, the estimates have been tens of thousands of people have been killed.
Australia and Canada released near identical statements about the operation, saying they support the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. New Zealand, however, was slightly softer, instead saying it acknowledges the actions were designed to prevent Iran from continuing to threaten international peace and security.
Why did we choose acknowledge?
Because we're an independent country with our own independent foreign policy, and we express it as we see fit. You can argue the semantics of it, but I don't think our positions are that different.
When it comes to the question of the legality of the strikes, Christopher Luxon would not take a position.
This is an independent actions of two nation states that have their own intelligence and their own information. I can't second guess that. I'm not party to that. I don't receive that information to know on the basis on which they have seen to actually launch these attacks, whether that's a legal basis or any other intelligence they may have.
Nor would he pass judgment on whether the bombing of a girls' primary school, which left around 150 dead, was a bad thing.
The US and the Israelis, I noticed, have got, with respect to the school bombing, that is up to them to to present what has happened there, because I'm not in a position to judge that from sitting in New Zealand.
But doubled down on saying any action to stop the regime developing nuclear weapons was a good thing.
As New Zealand, we've had a long-standing, commitment under successive governments that any actions that stops Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is a good thing. Any actions that take to stop them from sponsoring terrorism is a good thing. Any actions that stops them from killing their own people is a good thing. This is not a good regime.
I was somewhat shocked to see that comment from the Prime Minister, particularly the comment that he made right at the end of his press conference. That does not reflect the position that successive New Zealand governments have taken. That does not reflect the position that successive New Zealand governments have taken. Successive New Zealand governments have expressed significant concern about the Iranian regime, but that does not justify any action.
The Prime Minister was asked whether anything would include carpet bombing Iran.
We obviously understand, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that we understand this. I don't know how to be any clearer, guys.
Is there any limit to something being a good thing if it's designed to stop Iran having nukes?
Well, again, it's a hypothetical question you're essentially asking.
It's a question based on what you said.
Well, what I can say is we can support goals that means that Iran doesn't get its hands on nuclear weapons.
New Zealand currently has about 60 defence personnel deployed to various missions in the Middle East region. One such mission is the Combined Maritime Forces in Bahrain, where the Defence Force has a mandate to deploy up to 12 troops. It's based out of the US Navy base in Bahrain, which was targeted by Iranian strikes. NZDF wouldn't confirm how many, if any, personnel were present at the time of the strike, but told us in a statement all NZDF personnel currently deployed in the Middle East region are secure and accounted for. The NZDF continues to closely monitor events, assess the situation, has contingency plans in place and remains in contact with all deployed personnel.
Did we have to evacuate anyone from the US base in Bahrain ahead of that attack?
I'm going to let the Chief of Defence talk to that, and I'll let him answer that. But all I can reassure you is what he's reassured me on in our many conversations over the weekend, is that our people are safe.
Tagavi wants the government to go further too in sanctioning Iran.
The main thing we want the New Zealand government to do, especially now, is to immediately designate the IRGC as a terrorist organisation.
That has been a process, as you know, around terrorism designation that we have separately from this event, but suffice to say that I think we'll have a decision on that very shortly.
The Prime Minister drew the line, though, at expelling the Iranian ambassador.
So, Jenna, some pretty strong language there from the Prime Minister.
Yes, but not all of it intentional. The questions around legality, it's pretty fair enough for the government to take a pause on that and get some facts on the table before making any judgment on whether an ally's actions are illegal. It would be a massive diplomatic step to do so. New Zealand is a world away from being at the table where these decisions are made. We have not been briefed on the action before it went ahead. But that statement that he made about any action necessary to remove nuclear weapons from Iran was well beyond New Zealand's previous statements and policies on the matter. Now, I understand it was a misspeak, but given the opportunity, Christopher Luxon did not unwind himself from that position. We may see that in the coming days, and it points to a Prime Minister that is perhaps more comfortable when it comes to foreign policy, when he has an economic footing in trade, rather than dealing with these complex issues in the Middle East.
Former Prime Minister Helen has voiced her opposition to Israel and America's attacks on Iran, saying they are illegal under international law. And she called the New Zealand government's response a disgrace. I spoke with her a short time ago and began by asking why she called out the government in such strong terms.
New Zealand makes a big stand on being for international law and international rules-based order. Here we have a clear breach of the United Nations Charter, an invasion which does not have justification under international law, and nothing is said about that. It needs to be, if we are to be consistent in our application and interpretation of international law.
Well, this afternoon, when asked if the attacks were legal, Christopher Luxon said New Zealand wasn't party to all the information and that only the US and Israel can speak to that. So do you think perhaps we need to wait until more evidence emerges?
Most certainly not. The definition of what would be legal is, was there an imminent threat to the security of the United States and Israel? The answer to that is clearly no. Therefore, this becomes an act of aggression, and some of the legal commentary I'm seeing talks about it being a crime of aggression.
Helen, in your post online, you asked why the civility. I guess we know. What did you mean by that?
What we've seen over the last 2.5 years is the current government very steadily move to realign New Zealand with American foreign policy positions. And it seems to want to be in step with them, whatever they are. Now, that's most unfortunate when it comes to something like this, where a friend, the United States, has clearly breached international law. But how can we, in all consistency, call out Russia for the illegal invasion of Ukraine if we're not prepared to apply the same principle to a case like this?
America and Israel would potentially argue that they've successfully decapitated a violent and oppressive regime. In recent months alone, it's accused of killing as many as tens of thousands of its own citizens. Was action not necessary?
Under international law, countries can't take the law into their own hands. It would be like any citizen on the street deciding that they're going to go and do, some extrajudicial assassination or execution. If we live in a world where might is right, that's a pretty bad place for small countries, which, like us, really have no might. We only have our voice and a moral authority if we apply the principles of international law. So it is a sad day when, just because countries can do something, they do it and say, in effect, to hell with the law.
Just finally, I wonder your thoughts on this. Can regime change be achieved without boots on the ground? And if asked, do you think that the coalition government would send our own troops to remain aligned with Trump?
Certainly that's a question that should be asked of the Prime Minister and Defence Ministers. Would they put boots on the ground to back an illegal invasion? People will recall that in 2003, New Zealand did not take part in the invasion of Iraq because we knew that without the authority of the Security Council, that invasion was illegal. So I would very much hope that New Zealand doesn't go down a track of militarily supporting an illegal invasion.